names are not just those that we are given at birth. As a black female growing up in West London, I grew up at a time when the makeup of my school system, I was what you might class as the odd one out. I was referred to in public all the time as that does have clearly racist undertones to it.
Nikki is a life learner, diversity and inclusion enthusiast with a love for long walks and yoga. Nikki has over 16 years of experience in sales and marketing roles in the pharmaceutical industry. Her passions include writing, storytelling, as well as realizing and releasing potential in herself and others through reflection, coaching, and mentoring. She is interested in and talks about belonging, racial equity, disability inclusion, inclusive culture, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today's discussion involves Nikki sharing her experiences with insidious racism, including persistently being called by a name that wasn't hers, growing up as the only black girl in her secondary school, and the impact her early experiences have had on her adult self. Names are enriched with meaning, a part of one's identity, and hold such importance. Welcome to That's My Name. I'm Maya Mitsko September Welford. What's your name? So Nikki, I'm really excited to have you on as a guest today. You have quite a typical Western name, but I really believe that everyone has a story, so I'd love to hear yours. I know that you and I spoke previously, and I was really moved actually by the story that you shared with me. So I'd love to open up this space now for you to tell our listeners your story.
Honestly, thank you for having me on the podcast. I've listened to quite a few episodes. In fact, I think everyone so far, and everyone has moved me in a different way. So I'm thrilled to be sat in the guest seat today.
Yeah.
So my story, as you said, the name Nikki it is a standard and fairly typical name in Western society. So I agree, your listeners absolutely may be wondering what's the story behind that name. And I think what I'd love to be able to share today is the fact that names are not just those that we are given at birth by our parents, by our families, but also the names that people choose to call us or refer to us by, and the impact actually that can have on somebody's self-worth, their identity, their self-esteem. So that's the story that I'd love to be able to share today. And really, for me, as a black female growing up in West London, I grew up at a time when the makeup of my school system, I was what you might class as the odd one out. I certainly stood out. I went to secondary school where I was the only black female, with two black parents. And for that very reason, on a physical, visible sense, I stood out. So despite having, as you said, a standard, a typical name, physically, I stood out. And so I was referred to throughout the majority of my secondary school life as a name not Nikki. And in fact, my name actually on my birth certificate is Nicola, but we'll come on to that later, actually, Maya. But I wasn't referred to by my given name. People chose to call me Bob or Bob Marley, which I think even just, they don't sound anything like Bob Marley, a very, very popular reggae artist, particularly popular in the 90s. Almost synonymous with the Caribbean and with Jamaican culture, of which my parents are not Jamaican, by the way, but I was referred to in public all the time as Bob or Bob Marley. And that has had, as I'm sure you'll ask more questions later, a really powerful impact on shaping who I am today.
Even though you've kind of said it again and I already knew all that, it's still surprising. And Do you remember kind of the first time that someone called you Bob?
Goodness, I mean, I think sometimes that's a really great question. I think sometimes we block things out
Yeah.
that we perhaps don't want to hear and don't want to be reminded of because they're not a pleasant time in our past. And I think actually that's the power of storytelling, Maya, because I think by listening to some of your previous episodes, it actually unearthed a lot of the memories that perhaps I'd sort
Okay.
of hidden away. So I don't remember the exact time.
Hmm.
However, what I do know and what definitely surprised me when I reflected back on my past was that I actually used to respond to that name.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
didn't say, that's not my name. Or if I did, I certainly didn't say it clearly enough that they
Yeah.
responded to it, right? So I don't remember everything I said, but clearly,
Mm.
even if I had have done, it wasn't said, strongly and assertively enough that somebody thought, okay, well, I won't use that name again.
Yeah. 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 And how long did it go on for? Was it like weeks, months, years?
The I, I don't know the exact starting point, but it certainly was in year 7 and 8, 7/8,
Wow.
and it went
Okay.
on until I left there in year 11.
Wow. So that's like a good 4 years or so. 3, 4 years. Wow. Wow. And I'm guessing that a lot of this was at school. Um, did teachers play a role at all in, intervening?
Yeah, I mean that is a really difficult question to hear because
Mm.
thinking back, I'll start off by first of all saying that teachers didn't refer to me as Bob or Bob Marley.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they call me by my given name. However, for those of us that can think back to our school lives, you know, often people would shout very loudly your name across the corridor, across the sports field, in the
Mm.
gym. So I can't help but wonder that somebody must have heard me, somebody in authority, should I say, must have heard me being referred to by a name that they knew was not my own. And
Yeah.
I think that really speaks to bystanders and the the power that they have in their hands of being able to speak up. We talk a lot in the sort of corporate environment of speak up culture,
Yeah.
but I think
Yeah.
that is also very valid in the school system because that's really where all of our values and our experiences are really solidified and start to form as we become moving towards adolescence and sort of adulthood. And so I think that the power that teachers play is definitely not to be underestimated. They have the ability to say something and do something. I think to add on to that is the people that I hung out with, the people that I was friendly with, whilst they didn't call me Bob or Bob Marley, they didn't actually
Mm.
stand up for me. They weren't an ally, to use that term that
Mm.
we hear so much about now.
Hmm.
They did nothing. And so, in essence, you could argue that doing nothing is just as bad or on a similar par of actually committing the
Yeah.
the act of calling somebody a name which clearly isn't theirs. And I think going back to why Bob and why Bob Marley, and I think that that does have clearly racist undertones to it because Bob
Yes.
Marley was from Jamaica. I believe he had sort of mixed heritage. He was biracial. My family weren't from Jamaica, and I think it's a lot of people can probably tell stories around being referred to as individuals who
Mm.
might be typical of a certain culture,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that sort of rings true for that.
Yeah. And I think the whole thing around being a bystander, like if you're witnessing something, you're perhaps turning a blind eye to it or letting it happen and not kind of intervening, to your point, and I definitely agree with you, is you're playing a role, you're playing a negative role in that if you're silent. you're playing a role
Exactly.
in perpetuating that. So I think it's good that now I'm hearing a lot more narrative around, don't be a bystander, silence is compliance. But it's for me, it's shocking that teachers would have witnessed that. Obviously, yeah, it's like no doubt in my mind that teachers would have witnessed that or heard that if that had been happening for like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And it's just really quite sad that people
Yeah.
of authority didn't kind of step in. Is there anything that you wish you'd done differently? So thinking back to, Nikki or back then you were known as Nicola, as you were in year 7, year 8, going through secondary school. Is there anything that you wish you'd done differently?
Oh my goodness. A couple of things spring to mind. The first of which is around my understanding of racism and what it is and what it isn't. I think at that time in my life, it was very skewed and perhaps quite misguided. So I defined racism as that kind of overt image that you see in sort of 1960s, racial discrimination era, in both in the UK and in the United States. These sort of name calling that you would anticipate or that you would relate to racism. And because I didn't experience that for years, if you'd have asked me in my early 20s, did I experience racism? I might have defined that as no, I didn't, right? Because I wasn't called the N-word, or I wasn't subject to that very overt, very obvious racial discrimination or sort of racial language or slurs. So I think the first thing is about a better education from a younger age around what it is and what it isn't, and in fact that it can be very covert, very underhand, very insidious, almost, in a way that it's easy to be gaslighted and or made to feel that actually what you're experiencing is not exactly what it is. It's something completely different and innocent. So that would certainly be the first thing, was that my understanding of racism wasn't a full and complete view. I would say that the second thing was around agency, and maybe this comes with age and comes with hindsight, so maybe it's unrealistic to think that I would have had that at that age, but if I could have had it, I would like to have actually felt that it was okay to challenge, because looking back, it seems that I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that I could say to people, very, very strongly and sternly that is not my name. Don't refer to me in that way, and take it to some sort of authority to make sure that something is done about it. And I think when I think, well, why did I do that? Why did I not feel that I was able to challenge, when actually now I consider myself a very confident and quite assertive person? I would have definitely said something if I was the person I am now. So I think it's a lot to do with you stand out already, and so you want to try and blend in. So you think, well, I don't really want to cause a fuss or challenge, and so you think, if I don't say anything, then maybe they won't notice. But actually, it's quite obvious that they'll notice that I'm different, because there are physical differences, and I'm one of the only people that looks like me. So, there were other black males, but I was the only sort of black female in a school of close to 1,000 people.
Wow.
So this is not, 800, 900 people, however much there is in a school with a sixth form as well. So about 180 kids per year times about 7. So yeah. So there was a large presence, a large school, and you feel like the odd one out. and you feel like you don't belong.
Mm-hmm. And what impact do you feel these experiences had on your adult self? So if we touch on kind of work, first of all, how has it had any impact on kind of the work that you do, the work, kind of your work related interests, or your
Yeah,
career? Do you feel like it's had an impact there?
definitely. I think more so in the last sort of year or so, even though I've been in the
Okay.
working world for a lot longer than that. But, you know, I've been working in sales and marketing roles in the pharmaceutical industry.
Mm-hmm.
However, in the last year, I think I've certainly spent a lot more time in self-reflection, looking back at my early life and trying to sort of piece things together. If I think to your question specifically around the work that I'm doing, I'm now in the D&I space, so in diversity and inclusion space. So I think that's a definite link. One of my huge passions is about belonging. I think it's because I felt for so long that I didn't belong, and I think I tried really hard to fit in. However, now I try exceptionally hard to be who I am, and I'm comfortable standing out, even down to the way that I have my natural hair,
Yeah.
the way that I'm comfortable being me with all of its quirks and all of its idiosyncrasies.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to be that way, but that's taken a lot of inner work, a lot of self reflection, and a lot of time to be able to say that.
Mm-hmm. And then how about your friendships? Do you feel like those experiences has had an impact on the friendships that you have, or the way that you treat your friends now that you're, as your adult self?
I think thinking back to the speak up culture, in terms of how I am as an individual with friends or colleagues, speaking up is absolutely imperative and it's a part of who I am. And anybody that knows me will know that I'm not afraid to speak out, whether the conversation is comfortable or very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If I feel that somebody is being mistreated, if I feel the situation is unfair, either for me or for people around me, I will talk about it and I will try and find a way to change that situation if at all possible, or at least if I can't do that, speak out about it and make it clear that, you know, this is not okay. I think that would be the main change is around that, how I show up for other people, so that nobody has to go through the same sort of
Yeah.
experience as myself. Yeah.
Yeah. And so do you think that that is like a direct result? So you being so kind of committed to speaking up and standing up for those who, may not be standing up for themselves, or, when you're seeing something kind of going wrong, do you think that your commitment to standing up for others yourself is a direct result of people not standing up for you?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, undoubtedly. I don't think it's only until you look back on something and you look at the reasons why that becomes so clear. I
Yeah.
think previously I might have just said it's just something I do, but I don't think it's just something I do. I think it's embedded in my experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, because I guess you don't want people to feel how you felt for such a
Absolutely
long
not.
time growing
Yeah,
up. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. And how about the names that you're now known by? So I know that you mentioned that you are called, well, your name is Nicola on your birth certificate, but you're Nikki now.
Yeah.
So yeah, talk to me a bit about that.
Honestly, it's so strange. When I was preparing for today's podcast, I was really sort of thinking back around Nicola, Nikki, and I guess my real desire to be referred to as Nikki.
Mm-hmm.
And I think looking back, that the reason for that, it was a very intentional point in my life when I left the school that I was just referring to and moved to college and on to university and then into the world of work. I made a really conscious effort to announce myself to the world as Nikki. And I think now looking back that was because Nicola was almost synonymous with Bob and Bob Marley. And I really wanted to sort of do away with that part of my life, and the type of person that it made me. And I think that is the reason why, whilst I've not changed my name like officially, I'm comfortable if someone calls me Nicola, but actually my preference is to be it's almost like a reinvention actually, but not an official one on paper. But I guess it does have the power to allow you to be the person that you want to be. So Nicola was the person that allowed somebody to call her a name that was very upsetting. Nikki is the sort of person who stands up for herself and for other people.
Yeah, wow. And it's so true what you're saying, that names are such a big part of our identity, and it makes complete sense that it's, you've adopted a kind of, I guess, a variation of your birth name, in a way to separate and distance yourself from those childhood experiences, or those experiences growing up related to your name. So yeah, I think that's really, really powerful. It's interesting. I just had a thought. I think because everyone has a name, names are everywhere. I think sometimes people, because of that, I think people sometimes forget how important they are. I think through discussions like this, hopefully more people will kind of
definitely
think about and reflect. I think it's a reflection piece as well, because as we said at the beginning, everyone has that story to tell around names.
Definitely. And I think we hear the words microaggressions, but there's another word I'll introduce to the podcast, and that is microaffirmations. There are ways of affirming people through small, subtle acts. And one of those is by talking to them and referring to them by their name, the name which they want to be referred to by. That is a really small but powerful microaffirmation.
Oh wow, micro affirmations. I absolutely love that term. I will admit I have heard it before, but I've actually never used the term micro affirmations myself. But thank you so much for introducing that to our listeners, to the podcast. I love that phrase, micro affirmations, and I'm definitely going to start using that more. So, Nikki, what are you up to now? Tell us all about the exciting things that you're doing in your life.
Oh my goodness, I'm definitely delving in deep into the diversity and inclusion space. I've just started a role in the diversity and inclusion function, as it were, and I'm loving that, because it definitely speaks to something which I guess is embedded in the journey that I've had so far in life. And so I'm taking every opportunity to read, to listen, to network with people who are very experienced in D&I, to learn about the pitfalls, the things that have gone wrong, the things that perhaps I can avoid going into diversity and inclusion, because it is such a prickly topic. It is such a wide and far-reaching topic. It is a topic that can, a little bit like Marmite, people either love it or don't like it, and it can actually give rise to very uncomfortable conversations, which is something which I relish, because I do think that links to change and innovation, and people getting to know and understand each other and value each other's differences. So I'm up to getting absolutely stuck into D&I, writing about it, speaking on this podcast, and I'm just really keen to do that more and more, as much as possible, in terms of speaking and writing on something which I'm passionate about. So I'm wanting to really sort of build up my experience in this industry.
Oh, that's so fantastic, Nikki. It's I think again, it's really powerful that you're able to leverage and use your kind of lived experiences to kind of shape what you're doing now and what your focus area is now. So I think that's really important, and D&I is such an important area. I'm very, very happy that it's I'm hearing conversations around D&I kind of every single week. And I think it's amazing. I think it's so important, and I hope that the conversations continue, and I hope that, you know, we continue to see that positive change as a result of D&I. So I think, yeah, you're doing phenomenal work, and I'm so excited to hear kind of how it continues.